Since 2010, Clare Rewcastle Brown has been the figure behind Sarawak Report, the investigative website known for exposing stories of corruption in Malaysia. The former BBC journalist was even a wanted woman, but now, a mere 10 days after the defeat of the Barisan National Government, she is back here. We talked to her about the role her website has played in bringing about change. Claire, welcome back to Malaysia. Why are you back so soon after the election, and how do you feel?
Yes, I didn't want to come rushing in just while everyone was having their celebrations and have one or two stories, and when there's a good story, hard to keep me away.
Okay. and the Sarawak Report is now unblocked. So,
yes, so I gather. Yeah. Yes. So there's another good reason.
Yeah. So you'll be back at full steam. How do you feel the Sarawak Report impacted on election or on Malaysian press freedom?
I hope that it was a useful instrument for getting information to voters, and that was the job I set out to do as a journalist. And the reason I did that was because I felt that in many ways the Malaysian media was constrained from covering the sorts of things that I was able to do just in London. And that's why I got involved, and I felt very invited to do it by the journalist community here in Malaysia and by many people who read my reports.
I was reading this article which cited you as this woman who's changing the face of Malaysia from inside her living room with her articles and her laptop. How true is that?
Well, the changing the face of Malaysia I'll leave for you to decide. Okay. But yes, I was working from my laptop. Quite a lot in my living room. Well, actually, my husband takes it. He doesn't like me. I find other parts of the house. The kitchen, that was a very favourite spot late at night if I was having to do a few other things as well. I think this is the absolute wonder of the internet. In earlier years, I would have had to have had a whole team to help me do. So that was fantastic. I felt totally unleashed.
And were you ever tempted to just walk away from it all? Just say, okay, I've done my bit. It's time for someone else to take over, and maybe this situation can never change, and let me just walk away from it.
Well, I don't know who else I'd have found to be nuts enough to do it. I sound a bit like sort of Theresa May or something if I say I'm not a quitter. So I was never going to quit until we'd at least had this election, I think. I had a great deal of confidence, actually. Things could change. And I used to meet a lot of Malaysians would come over to London, and often they would be passionate for reform. But very rarely, in fact, I can't think that I ever met a Malaysian who thought it could happen. And so we'd have these conversations where I'd say, yes, believe in yourself. The very fact that you as a Malaysian care so much and that you've worked so long and so hard, that tells me that you can have change and reform. Thank goodness, that confidence I had turned out to be correct.
Some of the reasons people go to Sarawak Report is because of the really big exposés. Starting, if I can recall, there was Thai Mahmud, Musa Aman logging, Riza Aziz, and of course, probably the biggest issue of all in our election is 1MDB. What can you share with us about the 1MDB experience?
Well, it's been a privilege for me. I mean, I'm a journalist and I've always been an investigative journalist. Every investigative journalist is enticed and thrilled by a big story, particularly when it's your big story. There was a lot of suspicion articulated about 1MDB by opposition politicians in particular. Then I clocked on to what was clearly the link. The link between 1MDB and the family of Najib came out when I realised that Jolo was effectively accompanying Riza Aziz around Hollywood, and Riza Aziz had just launched this incredibly expensive and highly inappropriate movie. That absolutely put a jigsaw in place in my mind about all the various questions that had been raised about this fund, and I could just sense, I could see the pattern. And so I started by asking questions that were not satisfactorily answered. All I got was lots of legal letters. And so I kept pursuing it, and gradually, you pull together the threads that all add up to the same conclusion.
How about the Laura Justo interview? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, Laura's husband, Xavier, spent 18 months in jail, and shortly after he was arrested, she got in touch with me. We hadn't met or spoken, and my instinct was to say, right, we need to go screaming in front of television cameras and tell the world your husband's been jailed. And we did bring out a rebuttal of some of the awful things that were being written about Xavier after he was jailed. It was all set up, obviously. As I came back from Switzerland, where she was, and by the time I'd arrived in London, it's a very short flight, and I texted her again, and she said, we can't talk for a while now. And then for months, really, she went almost totally silent on me. I could tell what had happened, that they were threatening this couple and that, they mustn't speak to me. They were hoping that in return for cooperating, Xavier could be got out of jail, and that was the promise. And of course, that was not ever going to be the motive of the people who'd worked hard to get him in jail. They realised that they weren't going to get him out that way, and she reconnected with me. Of course, by then, she was brilliant. She had kept a detailed, documented evidence about every step of what had happened to them, as you saw from that movie, to give me enormous amount of proof as to how this whole conspiracy had been put into place, and the shocking things that were done to that couple.
The DOJ reports, the latest, have you been keeping up with them? Do you follow them diligently?
Yes, I follow events, and they've done an absolutely brilliant job on this whole investigation. And, for me, obviously, it was a highly welcome vindication. I felt very lonely at some points. The media were very nervous about covering 1MDB by and large. Obviously, some of the major newspapers did come in on some parts of the story, which was brilliant. There was a massive, heavily funded campaign to discredit me personally and my reporting. And it felt pretty good when the DOJ came in and vindicated just about everything I'd said. So on a personal level, that was brilliant, and I'm absolutely certain they will complete this job purposefully and thoroughly as they have started it.
Well, thank you very much for both the contribution of Sarawak Report and for taking time to talk to us today.
Thank you for your interest.
Rewcastle Brown said she doesn't regret a minute of the time she spent revealing these stories. As for the future, she knows that many Malaysian journalists have now been unleashed to compete and break new ground.